What's going on, everybody? Happy Memorial Day weekend. We're going to be talking about Montana's TikTok ban. Pin that. You know, one thing that's great about long weekends is it's really a chance to catch up with the time that you never have during a typical 2-day weekend. At any rate, today we wanted to talk a little bit about the TikTok ban in Montana. And why are we talking about a TikTok ban in Montana? I'll tell you why. Those of you who have been paying attention probably know that the governor of the state of Montana implemented a law that basically prohibits people from downloading the TikTok app from any entity, as the statute says, and allegedly they're going to try to enforce keeping people off of TikTok. I don't know how they're going to do that, but that's what the strategy is. So state of Montana is taking a pretty big swing here, trying to keep people off of TikTok and specifically banning it from being downloaded by anyone who is in the state of Montana. And if they catch the entity that's violating, and this is kind of interesting because they're not yet penalizing users who download the app. They're actually going after, the App Store, Google Play Store, anywhere else that you can download the app. But if they catch you violating it, it's a $10,000 fine per download, per instance. Okay. Question how they're going to enforce that, but we'll get back to that in a second. But what I find really, really interesting is that there's just a ton of legal problems here, right? And we're already seeing lawsuits come out from this. We're already seeing people who have tried to challenge this. The statute goes into effect January 1, 2024, so there's still some time before this prohibition goes into effect. The state of Montana has taken the position that they're going to use, software and technology that would basically be the same technology and software that they've used for catching people who are doing illegal, unlawful, downloading unlawful gambling apps. I guess there's a way to police that. So one of the ideas is that they're going to use this to sort of implement and track who's downloading the app. I don't know how that's going to work, but let's kind of dive into some of the issues with the actual ban. Well, first of all, there's several people who have filed suit already just within the last 7 to 10 days that this statute has been enacted. Again, it doesn't take effect till January 1, 2024. But there's tremendous free speech implications here, right? So as part of this ban, they're taking a complete approach against an entire platform, basically saying that this entire platform can't function. And as we all know, TikTok is a very popular place for all sorts of speech, whether it's government-related speech, private business-related speech. Everyone's got their opinions. If you've never been on TikTok, then it's probably can be one of the most vitriolic social apps, right, in terms of the amount of hate and the amount of canceling and the trolling that goes on. But that's what social media is kind of about too. We can talk about that. But the point is that you're precluding people from wholesale accessing an app. And their premise for doing so, according to the state of Montana, is this issue of security of the information of their residents. That, TikTok is a Chinese company, it's owned by a Chinese company, and therefore there are serious concerns about where your users' data is going. Well, what's interesting about that is, are you more concerned about a Chinese company knowing some basics about, your information, your browsing history? Or are you more concerned about private American enterprises and even the United States government knowing those things? Query that. But going back to the point here, no evidence has been shown at the state level, at the federal level, that anyone's information is being actually accessed and used by the Chinese government. Evidence hasn't been shown. The way legislation works, if most of you don't know, is you need to show some level of harm. if you're going to try to withstand constitutional scrutiny, you need to show that there's a basis for this law taking effect. And right now, nobody seems to know what that is. You know, if you ask the Attorney General of state of Montana, they're going to say, well, Montana is one of the few apps that doesn't allow you to disallow certain location information and browsing information. That's a little weak, to be honest with you. That's a little weak. You know, in terms of data privacy and information gathering, look, let's go back in time. 20 years ago, Target, right? Big red circle dot. Target retailers had the technology and the ability, without any apps, okay, to track their consumers to their purchasing behavior and their demographics so closely that you may have heard this story, and you can do your own research and read about it. But they were able to discover when a father, right, when his daughter was actually pregnant and the daughter didn't even know that she was pregnant at the time. Meaning the purchasing behavior, the types of purchases that were being made, when they were being made, the timing of it, based on Target's data aggregation tools, they were able to tell that this individual, this woman was expecting, and it was a girl living at home with her parents. That came to be a pretty significant surprise for dad. So dad gets really mad. Why are you advertising these kinds of things to my daughter? How dare you? And dad later discovers that daughter's pregnant. This is all 100% based on consumer behavior, purchases. It has nothing to do with the location of your app, you know, what you're scrolling through, what you're clicking. This is 20 plus years ago, and we're talking about Target, right? What's going on, James? How are you? Yeah, I agree. It's crazy, and they've got way too much power. Well, let's talk about what that means. But going back to my point, show me proof that the Chinese government is actually using user data from TikTok, and I might change my opinion. Can we conclude that they are? Maybe. What are they using it for? What are they using it for? If you're concerned about the Chinese government accessing your information, don't download the app. Why does a state have the ability? This is my problem. State government, federal government shouldn't be telling its people what apps it can and can't download to a degree. Gambling as an industry is regulated, right? TikTok is social media. Are you enacting other statutes to target social media enterprises like Instagram, Facebook, etc., Twitter? Why is it that you're targeting TikTok? Number one. Number two, you haven't demonstrated any harm, like I've said. There's no actual evidence that you've presented anywhere that China's doing something with this information. Number three, why don't you leave it in the hands of individual users? Why don't you go on a state campaign to say, this is what TikTok, we believe, is doing with your information. You shouldn't download the app. Why don't you take that approach instead of wholesale banning the ability of your residents to access the app? By the way, this is another interesting problem that I have. How many people actually live in Montana? How many people who live in Montana actually use the app? Those numbers are pretty small. It's like 200,000 people who reside in Montana who are on TikTok currently. So you've enacted this statute, which is going to require resources to enforce, to protect 200,000 people, many of whom actually disagree with your position on the law, which is, no, we want to be able to access it. This sounds like more of a political play. If you don't like the app, you don't like the Chinese government, there's other ways to actually structure something that makes more sense. For example, I'll give you one. Why not enact a statute or lobby the federal government to enact a federal statute that actually has privacy protections in place, that requires reporting, that requires certain information not be asked, right? We have laws like this. This is not unprecedented. We have laws like COPPA to protect children under the age of 13 on apps. We have a statute that penalizes apps for targeting children under the age of 13 without parental consent. Plain and simple. FTC enforces it. DOJ goes after people for these violations. There's a model that already exists for it. Do we really need a state governor to enact a law that says nobody can download it in the state? That's a little harsh. Doesn't make sense. Far too overbroad. Show me the proof. So these are the kinds of things that we should be focusing on. This just looks like an old dude who doesn't understand technology. That's what this looks like. Who doesn't understand technology, who doesn't like the app. You don't need to like the app, right? Welcome to 2023, man. Understand how technology works. You just look like a buffoon. Honestly, that's what I think. If you're watching governor of governor of Montana, you look like a complete backwards, completely illiterate in terms of technology, how this works. How are you going to enforce this? Let's think about this for a second. Right now, users are not penalized. Under his statute, entities that allow residents to download the app are targeted. So how are you going to know if Apple is allowing users to download the app right now? If you live in Montana, why don't you try downloading the app right now and see what happens? What's going to happen? There's no real-time block on it because that's something TikTok would have to do. The state of Montana doesn't have access to back-end data that can block a user who wants to download the app. So they put the onus now on enforcing. They put the onus now on these third-party apps that have nothing to do with TikTok. They just allow the app on their third-party platform. Why are you holding third parties responsible for what the app is doing? Query that. That doesn't make sense either. So many things wrong with the statute. But anyway, if you're a TikTok user or you want to be a TikTok user and you want to download the app, you just got a new device, whatever, you could easily just sign into a VPN and your location would not be known. Then there's the argument, well, what about when you turn your location services on, or if TikTok needs access to your location services? Even with your GPS off, TikTok can tell, if you read their privacy terms, TikTok can tell generally where you are within a 3-mile radius of where you are, something like that. So what happens then? Does the app become disabled? How are you practically going to enforce this? We don't know. It's not very clear. It'll be interesting to see if people can actually access content on the app if you already have the app, right? It's not going to be deleted off of your phone. How are they going to enforce that? Once again, this is asking for more problems than I think it's worth. This is not an actual legitimate solution. We haven't even started to talk about and attack the legal arguments yet. We'll get to that. This is just the easy, low-hanging fruit of how are you going to enforce this? Why are you enacting this? What's the basis for it? And like I said in the very beginning, if you missed it, I'm not a fan of a foreign government having my information. I'm also not a big fan of my own government having detailed information about me without reason. But let's be honest. Do you guys shop on Amazon? Okay. Do you exist on the internet at all? American companies have way more information on you than you think, than you're probably comfortable with, right? We all know the scary feeling of when you're at home, nobody's around, and you're talking, or you're talking to a spouse, significant other, and then you get served an ad on Instagram about what you were just talking about. That's a little weird, isn't it? If you have Alexa, the problem's even compounded further. That's a little weird. I'm uncomfortable with that. We don't have legislation to protect against that. We allow it because we are a country that supports free enterprise. And there are certain First Amendment issues, and we'll talk about that. But not even getting into, again, the legal arguments. There are all kinds of problems with enforcement and practicality. And again, my position is this. I don't like the government to tell me what kind of app I can have on a device and what I can access. That sounds like China to me. So your answer to China is to become like China. Think about that. Your answer to a foreign government surveillance is to basically create a communist environment for your residents. Again, 200,000 approximate users of TikTok in Montana. And you enact a statute for this? What's the harm? Those are the practical questions. Let's talk about the legal arguments for a second now, jumping in. First Amendment being the most obvious, right on the forefront of this. State governments, federal governments cannot engage in censorship, content limitations on speech. That's a violation of the free speech of the First Amendment. Isn't that what they're doing? They're precluding an entire platform from from having access to people. They're precluding entire population of people from having access to a platform and review content and publish dissenting opinions and do whatever you want to do on TikTok on the basis of some speculative scare. It doesn't match up. First problem, right? It's not a neutral regulation. It is actually impacting speech, their ability to speak, ability to protest. It's a problem. Second problem that I've identified is we have this concept called federal preemption. Federal preemption means there's certain areas of the law and day-to-day life that the federal government has primary authority and maybe exclusive authority on. National security is one of those things. So if your argument is that there's a national security issue here, national security is the province of the federal government. Now, I would still have a problem if the federal government enacted a wholesale ban on TikTok. For all the same reasons we just talked about. I think there needs to be more narrow, specific privacy protections rather than a wholesale ban on an app. That to me doesn't make sense. But nevertheless, argument number 2 is national security is a federal issue. So why don't you, state of Montana, go to Congress and talk about the specific issues that impact your constituents, get together with other states, tell them what problems you have, and enact a federal law. Why don't you do that? You haven't done that. You haven't even shown proof of what this issue is. Third issue, constitutional argument. Again, I think Montana, my personal opinion, is running afoul of the Commerce Clause. What's the Commerce Clause? The Commerce Clause, basically, of the Constitution precludes states from enacting laws that unfairly prohibit or violate interstate commerce, meaning you move from Arizona to Texas, Montana, Texas to Montana, New York to Montana. Well, you're being unfairly prejudiced. You're having significant rights taken away from you. It precludes people from traveling in or makes them, super suspect traveling into your state. People who are advertising in your state or outside of your state, when they cross into Montana, it impacts them in a significant way. Commerce Clause was designed to allow people between states to engage in business, again, to a certain degree, without having to worry about overregulation. That is a problem here, clearly, because if you're an advertiser or you're a content creator and you are in, again, New York, but you're targeting the state of Montana, users in Montana, you have a significant audience that's now lost, right? Finally, I think just from a legal standpoint and attacking, how overbroad is this statute? Again, no specific harm alleged, no evidence given for why users in your state should be scared or concerned, and we simply have a statewide ban. Another problem I was just thinking as I was sitting here, what would happen if TikTok's parent company broke off an arm and started a US-based TikTok that actually runs the application? Your statute ultimately becomes void, right? Your statute ultimately becomes void because the premise of the statute is Chinese ownership, which you don't have anymore. So that security problem goes away, right? But again, I don't think this is something that I think TikTok should have the opportunity to enforce. TikTok should have the opportunity to correct if there are problems with the app, if there are in fact national security, which I've said for now the third or fourth time today, they don't really exist, or you haven't proven what the actual national security or privacy problem is with TikTok, other than the fact that you don't like the app. Can TikTok control its own settings on, if you said, okay, we're not gonna penalize, Apple Store or the Google Play Store if you allow users to download the app. We're gonna ask TikTok to regulate the location of individuals when they download the app. Can they do that? Maybe they can. Not every app has a geofence ability at the time of download. I suppose you could require it to turn on your location and that it wouldn't allow a download if you were in Montana. I suppose you could require a credit card during the download process that requires an address that's not in Montana. So TikTok, in theory, could enforce this at the download phase. Again, I think it's completely unfair and improper, not a good business practice to target Apple or the Google Play Store, or any other entity in which you could download TikTok. So at any rate, as you can tell, I'm not a big fan. There's too many problems. I think creators are impacted negatively. I think advertisers are impacted negatively. And if you have such a big problem with your users, your constituents' security and data privacy, enact a data privacy law, not a wholesale ban on an entire app. That doesn't make sense. It violates the First Amendment. Now, there are many lawsuits already being filed. I know of at least 2. The ACLU has sued. I know that a group of TikTok users, 6 of them, also sued. These lawsuits are in district court in Montana. We'll watch them carefully. We'll give you updates. But I think all of them have said the same thing that I'm saying today on this live, which is this statute is overbroad. It violates the First Amendment. It violates the Commerce Clause. You're unfairly targeting people. This wholesale ban on the app just doesn't make sense. Unless you can show that this is absolutely necessary and that is an extreme and serious immediate harm to national security, there's no evidence of that. And therefore, your statute's overbroad. I think the statute will get stricken. I think it will get, I think people will be able to prove that it violates the Constitution in many respects. So I don't think this is going to be on the books for very long. The interesting thing is going to be to see how other states respond to this and maybe learn and try to enact something that actually makes sense. Yet to be seen. At any rate, that's all I have for you guys. We're going to be following this pretty closely, and we'll definitely update you as we hear more about the outcomes of these lawsuits that are looking to enjoin the state of Montana from precluding users in their state from downloading or using the app. Thanks for joining us. We'll post this in our feed, and if you have any comments, drop them